Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today on this Thursday. Tensions did flare overnight at the pro-Palestine demonstrations at the University of California, Los Angeles campus as the LAPD broke through barricades, dismantling the encampment. Now, hundreds of protesters defied orders to leave. Some formed human chains as police fired rubber bullets and flashbangs at some people, detaining others, their hands bound with zip ties as they were detained. This was one night, of course, after non-student pro-Israel protesters violently attacked the encampment, including by shooting fireworks into the crowd. Protesters barricaded themselves at UCLA last week, protesting the war in Gaza and demanding the school cut any financial ties to Israel. University officials declared the site unlawful on Wednesday evening. Police officers declined to intervene in Tuesday night when student protesters were under attack by the pro-Israel counter-protesters, but they were called last night to clear out the encampment with riot protection gear, face shields, and zip ties. Police were met with resistance from the protesters, and according to reports, about 300 people were arrested. Many who were detained seemed to go willingly as officers pulled them away.
Meanwhile, 90 people were arrested at Dartmouth University, New Hampshire. A Dartmouth history professor was among those arrested. Video circulated widely of Annalise Orlek, chair of Jewish studies at Dartmouth, being roughed up. After her arrest, she tweeted, "Those cops were brutal to me. I promise I did absolutely nothing wrong. I was standing with a line of women faculty in their 60s to 80s trying to protect our students. I have now been banned from the campus where I have taught for 34 years. Across the country, pro-Palestinian student activists at Portland State University barricaded themselves in the library. They've occupied the library since Monday, according to the Washington Post. Police started clearing out protesters from the library this morning. Meanwhile, at Georgia State University, which has ties to both Cop City and Israel via its Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange Program, graduating students wearing keffiyehs were hauled off the stage during graduation ceremony and kicked off campus.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are weighing in on the protests, with some siding with them, others not so much. Speaking with CNN's Caitlin Collins on Wednesday, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance was put on the spot and denounced the protests. Let's take a look.
Okay, so you agree that people who break in and vandalize a building should be prosecuted?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just checking because you did help raise money for people who did so on January 6th, which was, impeding an official proceeding, breaking into a building that they weren't allowed to be in, and vandalizing the Capitol.
Well, Caitlin, I know that this is the obsession of the national media to talk about what happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago on January the 6th.
It's not an obsession. I'm just seeing if it's a double standard.
No, let me answer the question, Caitlin. I mean, look, here's been my basic argument about January the 6th. If you beat up a cop, of course, you deserve to go to prison. If you violated the law, you should suffer the consequences. But there are people who protested on January the 6th who have had the complete weight of the Justice Department thrown at them when, at worst, they're accused of misdemeanors.
President Biden weighed in on the student protest this morning, standing by a podium saying there should be no place in America for hate speech or racism. Let's watch.
I understand people have strong feelings and deep convictions. In America, we respect the right and protect the right for them to express that. But it doesn't mean anything goes. It needs to be done without violence, without destruction, without hate, and within the law. Make no mistake, as president, I will always defend free speech, and I will always be just as strong in standing up for the rule of law. That's my responsibility to you, the American people, and my obligation to the Constitution.
He did not take questions, but he did answer one reporter as he walked off stage, saying that no, he didn't. Biden said he did not believe the National Guard should be sent to the college campuses.
So first of all, the development at UCLA, where after a night where campus security guards and the police were notably absent or were spotted literally fleeing away from the scene as college students, who the campus security at least have been employed to protect, were being viciously attacked by a pro-Israel mob. About a dozen students, as I understand it, were hospitalized overnight because of the attacks that happened on Tuesday night. Wednesday night, the mob was replaced by more attacks, this time from the police, who reportedly shot rubber bullets and were using really intense anti-riot machinery against the crowd. There have been images of at least one student in particular who was hit in the face with a rubber bullet and had bloody contusions all over. These are the kinds of weapons that can result in death if used improperly. And it is fascinating. It is really remarkable to see the lengths to which these administrations are willing to go to clear off peaceful encampments from their schools. And it does seem like it's only a matter of time before we do end up in a situation that's very reminiscent of Kent State.
Right. I mean, clearing out some encampments that had developed their own rules for who was allowed to come in and out of that space, contrary to the university policy. People couldn't enter the library and other spaces unless they had someone who could vouch for them, that they were not a Zionist, that sort of thing. That was not a situation that the authorities were going to allow to go on indefinitely. So it came to this. People can, have whatever opinion they have about it from watching the footage. It did seem pretty brutal to me, and I do not relish the idea of the cops chasing other protesters and mass imprisoning people or assaulting people, and they have the right. I think Biden actually struck the correct tone there. You have the right to peacefully protest. Absolutely, you have a free speech right to do that. It can't be violent. He slipped up once. He said something about hate.
Yes, I was going to pick up on that. Hate is legal. Hate speech is legal.
Hate is absolutely
so what you
legal.
have is I thought that was a deeply authoritarian statement. As the President of the United States of America, the day after Congress just passed a law equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, saying that, sure, lip service, we protect speech in this country, but we don't protect hate, and you don't have a right to do hate. The law now basically says as much. You don't have a right to speak hate, and then what is defined as hateful is something that could get a Jewish studies professor roughed up by the cops, a white-haired woman who I believe is in her 70s, roughed up by the cops and arrested. That is what's being done in the justification.
Not only do I agree, I agree
anti-Semitism.
so much that my radar today is talking about that very exact thing, this very bad campus anti-Semitism definition law, which was passed by the House of Representatives yesterday by an overwhelming majority, so a small number of Republicans and larger but still small number of Democrats voting against it.
I think only 70 Democrats voted against
70 and I believe 20 Republicans, that codifies the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, their name is along those lines. Yeah. Their definition of anti-Semitism, which includes just criticism of the state of Israel, Israel's right to exist, it being held to a double standard. Again, those are political opinions. You can think they're hateful, you can disagree with them, but obviously they are protected and you're allowed to utter them. So we are going, and that is the bigger threat, even as I criticize the protesters for their antics and their theatrics and object to many of them, and specifically object to them occupying public spaces and then not allowing other people to enter them. The greater threat to everyone's free speech is having new policies that monitor anti-Semitism or any other type of defined hate speech. Again, First Amendment, it could not be clearer. Supreme Court has been crystal clear on this subject. Hate speech is not a different category of speech. It is the very speech that is protected by the First Amendment. In fact, you generally don't need speech protections for speech that is not controversial and nobody objects to. You need it for speech that is confrontational and offensive and not appreciated, Nazi speech, racist speech.
Yeah, what seems to be very clear is that when Proud Boys march, when Nazis march, that hate speech is and should be protected. They are not only unmolested by the police, and oftentimes they are guarded by the police, but college kids who are critical of Israel get attacked by the police and shot with rubber bullets, and that's when they're not being attacked by pro-Zionists without getting protection from the police. I don't know if this is the case that
Proud Boy type people never come into conflict with the police.
There was literally a march in West Virginia earlier this week, I believe, might have been at the very end of last week, in which Proud Boys marched unmolested through the streets, as they have a right to do. And that contrasted with what was happening contemporaneously with college kids really speaks volumes about who the police are employed to protect and defend in the United States of America. Speaking to that, Joe Biden's point about how he respects rule of law is also in deep contradiction to what's been going on with with America intervening to protect Israeli leaders from being charged with war crimes and arrested by the ICC. It does seem like, well, again, rule of law, international law does not apply when it comes to Israel. And I think more and more Americans are asking a question, why Israel is treated so differently when it comes to speech, when it comes to international law, when it comes to the Leahy Act, when it comes to American aid, than any other country on earth.
Okay, but just going back to the point I just made, I mean, the leadership of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, other people, got, they got terrorism charges for being accused of helping to organize January 6th. He wasn't even there, and he's going to jail for 20 years.
I'm talking about the response of the police to demonstrations.
Okay, well, I mean, that was J.D. Vance's point in the clip we played, reacting to the idea that I think that law enforcement, the criminal justice system, has not been overly punitive to right-wing people is not a perception.
Right, I think his point about civil disobedience is right. You do the crime, you do the time. But to, in one instance, be saying people are heroic and I'm going to raise money for their bail after they not only broke into the Capitol and did property destruction, but did so ostensibly with the goal of stopping the democratic process and validating the votes of the American people and it was a silly dream, but with the idea of overturning an election is okay, but I'm going to cry crocodile tears about vandalism because kids broke a window to open a door to peacefully occupy a college building. I think these are not these are not equivalent.
Their belief was that the election was stolen from Trump and that he was the actual winner.
Right.
That view is not correct, but they would see it as
right.
They thought
so
they were in the right.
Either you
just
think
like
property
the people
damage is evil and horrible.
Smashing the buildings in Hamilton
either
Hall
you think
they're
property
justified.
damage is horrible, or you think it's a reasonable response depending on the context. And I don't think you can cry the crocodile tears and be calling for the National Guard. I'm not saying him specifically, but calling for the National Guard as so many politicians have done, and be calling for the most heightened response, violent response to these protesters that exist, when you can recognize in a different context that that's not the way it should be done.
I'm calling for a proportional, reasonable response to property destruction and occupying.
And regrettably, that's not what we got when we got anti-tank vehicles driven up to the windows of Hamilton Hall, all to arrest some English literature majors who, again, we should not lose focus of the fact were standing up to ask their university to divest from Israel, which has been described as plausibly committing a genocide by the ICJ. Stick around, we've got more Rising for you coming up next.